Hey everybody, welcome to Live with Marketers. It's the talk show for marketers by marketers, and where we bring together some of the industry's top minds to talk shop. So today we're going to talk about how insights can inform the next decade of marketing. Essentially what we're going to do is talk about the top trends in marketing that we feel are going to define the 2020s. So let's set up today's show. I've got Lacey Miyazaki here with me and Alan Gannett. And I want to have them introduce themselves. Lacey, why don't you go first?
So I have spent the past 7 years or so of my career at LinkedIn, spanning a variety of research and analytics roles. But currently I manage our Marketing Solutions Insights team. And so that means my team gets to mine and query LinkedIn's really robust, pretty massive data set, but also works directly with customers to help them tell meaningful, actionable stories from that data.
So we're going to dive into some of this data in a few minutes, so definitely stick around. And Alan, tell us about yourself.
Well, first of all, thank you for having me. You might not know from watching me, this is actually Sean's very large office that he's embarrassed to tell you. It's all private. And my background is I used to run a marketing analytics company, and then I'm now a full-time author and speaker. I wrote a book called The Creative Curve, which is all about the systems and the patterns behind creativity and how you can learn to become more creative.
And we're going to talk a little bit about the book later in the show too, so definitely stick around. Before we get started into the meat of the content, I want to highlight a few housekeeping items. First, if you're tuning in from Slido, we'll be sending out the full recording of this show, so don't worry about taking too many notes. To follow along on social, search hashtag Live with Marketers or follow the LinkedIn Marketing Solutions Showcase page on LinkedIn. Again, that's the LinkedIn Marketing Solutions Showcase page on LinkedIn. And finally, when this is all done, please take the time to fill out the brief survey at the end of the session to let us know what you thought of the content. We pay a great deal of attention to this. It really helps us make these shows better and better as we go along. So on to the topic. Actually, first, I wanted to do one more thing to talk to our guests and introduce them to you. We have a thing at LinkedIn where we ask people what's not on their LinkedIn profile. So Lacey, I wanted to ask you, what is not on your LinkedIn profile?
Sure. You'd think I'd be used to this question by now, but I guess what I'll share today is what's not on my LinkedIn profile is that I'm a baker. Admittedly, it's probably not on my LinkedIn profile because it's not a skill yet.
I will endorse you though.
Yeah.
Thank you. But I've been getting really excited about it. I actually got one of those KitchenAid stand mixers for Christmas or over the holidays. So I've been having some fun baking, trying some new things. Some blueberry crumble muffins turned out well. Some pretzels turned out well. Didn't look great, tasted great.
Were you making like soft pretzels?
Soft pretzels, those ones you see at the fairs.
Yeah, fantastic.
Full on.
They're LinkedIn ready, not Instagram ready.
Exactly. Not Instagram ready. Some chocolate souffles, which are actually pretty proud of. They tasted pretty good.
All right, that sounds good.
Work in progress.
Alan?
I'd say for me, 10 years ago, I was a very, very pitiful runner-up on Wheel of Fortune. I lost to a woman named Joan from Alexandria, Virginia, who won $60,000, and I did not. And I got bankrupt twice, so, you know.
Wow.
The trauma's still there.
Okay. You were on another game show, is that right?
You're just bringing out all of my embarrassing secrets today. I was also on this like very silly show that Nick Cannon hosted on MTVU. That was like a Shark Tank for college students. This was a while ago. And I also lost on that, but thank you for,
Okay, all right.
I'm going to call my therapist now.
Sorry to bring up such dark memories. So I'll introduce myself too. I'm Sean Callahan. I'm going to be the moderator of the show, if you couldn't tell already. And I work here at LinkedIn. And I'm a marketer, and my main job is editing the LinkedIn marketing blog and the LinkedIn sales blog, and I encourage you to subscribe. So thanks. And what's not on my LinkedIn profile is I was a caddy in high school and college, and I caddied at the club, Indian Hill Club, north of Chicago, where the Murray brothers caddied, and it was the basis, the model for Caddyshack. So I got that going for me.
Did you get good tips?
Decent
tips.
Yeah, decent tips. I was the Caddy of the Year 1985.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Pretty good.
That's pretty good.
Yeah, it's all been downhill. So let's talk about some of the past decades. We're going to talk about trends that are going to define the 2020s, but wanted to give a little context. We talked a little bit beforehand. In the 1980s, we would define as the decade of print, especially for B2B marketing. That was when trade publications were at their peak. In the 1990s, trade publications were knocked off of that peak by the World Wide Web beginning to come to the fore. In the 2000s, it was a decade of the rise of social media. The 2010s, there were a number of trends going on. We're going to talk about two of them in just a second here. And then the 2020s, we're going to discuss what major trends are coming down the pipeline that marketers should really be paying attention to. And that's going to be the bulk of the show today. So let's dive into these, the 2010s. Like, what were some of the key themes? And one of them we've agreed on was big data. So Lacey, tell us about what you make of what happened in that decade with big data.
Yeah. So certainly, I think for me, it really helps to think about some of the phases we've seen big data go through over the last decade. So thinking about, for the first time ever, having the ability to collect and store pretty vast amounts of data. So companies like Microsoft or Amazon Web Services, really for the first time starting to make all of this accessible to small businesses.
Right.
And then from there, starting to think about some of the tools that actually enable us to analyze and visualize these large volumes of data. So I think about companies like Tableau, the growth of Tableau,
Right.
Power BI as a solution. But I think probably where Sean and maybe Alan, you'll start to agree, is that the challenge still for marketers today is how to utilize this data really effectively to make decisions.
Yeah, I think if you think about the last decade, it was still really around storage. Like, I think you go to conferences and people would talk about big data, about how we're going to use it and revolutionize everything. But really what we figured out over the last 10 years was how to just store the data and do some graphs on it. Like, that's basically what the 10 years was. And I think that for me, the big takeaway, and that I think coming out of the decade that got really good, is companies realize, big or small, that having a centralized repository of all of your customer data, ideally with engagement data, revenue data, all the sort of different things you can collect in one place is really important. So we really saw the sort of increasing importance of CRMs for B2B and CDPs for B2C. And I think that, to me, is really exciting, because now I think the next 10 years, now that we have that data, what could we actually do with it? So that's what I think the next 10 years is going to look like.
Right, I totally agree. I wrote a book with Russell Glass called The Big Data Driven Business.
You literally wrote the book on this question.
I wrote the book on the question, but I think the title was off, because I think what we should have called it was Little Data, because I think the big data is so intimidating and there's this mass of data, but I think especially small businesses and medium businesses, they should be really focusing on the data that really matters to them, the data that they can correlate or even make into causation what causes revenue to come, and focus on those three things, say. I think that's what really big data, how it should be used by small
Or another
companies.
way of thinking of it is it's a lot of little data.
Yeah, right. Yeah.
Storing
yeah.
a lot of little data.
The other trend we were talking about was empowered customers were sort of defined the 2010s, and sort of made content marketing necessary because they were able to self-educate. So Alan, let's start with you on this one. What's your analysis of why that was an important trend?
Yeah, so one of the things I think is interesting is that in B2B marketing, we sort of have this like delay off B2C. And so it's pretty obvious if you think about B2B, what's going to be next. Just look at what B2C was doing 5-10 years ago. And so what we saw, right, is that coming out of the 2000s, online review sites were sort of one of the big things that sort of the maturation of the World Wide Web sort of led to. People use things like Yelp, and now obviously we have Google reviews. And that really changed how people make decisions. Like, think about how often when you're buying a product on Amazon and you're looking at the reviews, that affects your decision. And so what we saw is that B2B has really taken this idea to heart, and now there's websites like Capterra, TrustRadius, G2 Crowd, where if you're going and buying business software, you're reading other people's experiences. And that's sort of wild, because so often when we think about B2B marketing, we think we have this total control over the information flow with our customers. But that's not true anymore. And that means that we have all these new things like content marketing and all these things that we have to evolve into.
Yeah, I think it's huge. And if you think about why that really matters, why it's so important for buyers to be empowered, I mean, we're all very well familiar, but in B2B, it's an incredibly emotional buying decision, incredibly complex. And so it's a necessity to be this informed, to understand everything you want to know about how to vet, research, implement, and even renew some of these types of business solutions. So that empowerment for buyers is huge.
Well, I think this is one thing where on the vendor side, right, having run a company that's sold into sort of B2B buyers, I think sometimes we forget the emotion of it. And if you're on the buying side, what you realize is that existentially, the thing that a lot of people are thinking about deep down is job security.
Absolutely.
And when you're making these big, expensive decisions, even though it's not your money, it's your reputation.
Yep.
And so that's a very emotional thing. And I think B2B marketers and salespeople are finally starting to really understand that.
Yeah, and I think a lot of B2B marketing campaigns are understanding that and really appealing to people's emotions with humor and fear, maybe, you know. It can be very effective. And yeah, the B2B buy, I think, is much more emotional than the consumer buy, like when you're buying.
If you buy toothpaste, you can always throw it out.
Yeah.
These are long-term decisions.
Yeah,
They're going to
exactly.
affect
Yeah, right.
every day, all your colleagues,
Totally.
all your peers. Yeah.
Yeah. So, Lacey, you're very familiar with LinkedIn data. You're working with it every day, and so we've got a lot of data from LinkedIn profiles and job postings, and from some other things that sort of give a window on what skills are most valued right now by marketers and the people who hire them. So what can you tell us about that?
Yeah, definitely. So the world of marketing is an incredibly complex one. I would say things like content editing, copywriting, SEO, or search engine optimization, all of these are still top skills for marketers and table stakes today. But what's increasingly difficult is to find folks that are masters amongst all these skills. And so I do think the competition for top talent is really going to heat up over the next decade. Something though exciting or something that I'd love to share is what we're starting to see on job requisitions or jobs postings is that strategy or strategic marketing skills, these are really starting to surface to the top. So these are things like content marketing strategy, measurement strategy, paid search strategy. All of these are really starting to surface. And what this really means, I think, is that companies are looking for their employees to have a stronger point of view on strategic decision making, come to the table with a point of view besides just having these kind of niche how-to skills.
I think as software is sort of automating some of the tasks that marketers are doing manually, now there's, well, okay, you have to step back and do the strategy of how this all fits together, right? It's more valuable too, which is good.
Yeah, completely.
You've got some data on the courses?
We do. So actually, given we sit on such a wealth of data, we've actually taken a look at the top LinkedIn learning courses that marketers have taken over the course of the last year. And we are seeing that the courses they're taking are starting to align with some of these trends too. So things like online marketing foundations, digital marketing trends, strategic thinking, integrated marketing plans. These are all some of the top courses that are surfacing to the top. So it really goes to show that this is the direction companies are looking for marketers to take.
Yeah, and I'm looking at the top courses there. The top 4 are all about digital marketing in one way or another. I mean, it's still, even though it's not been around it's been around for a long time. I mean, the 90s, and we're still having to learn it. It's constantly evolving.
Ever-changing landscape.
Yeah, I mean, my job changes almost every day. And one other thing that that LinkedIn did, mining its own data, is they found that the top soft skill that human resources is looking for is creativity. So, Alan, I wanted to talk to you about this. You wrote the book, The Creative Curve. What can you tell us about why you think companies are really valuing creativity these days?
So I think what you're seeing with all of the sort of technology and all things that are coming out, with so much stuff like we were saying being automated, there are things that are left are strategy and creativity. And so what I think is exciting about that is I think you have a pretty clear roadmap for your career if you're in any sort of creative or entrepreneurial field, which is that you have to invest in your creative skills because that's the future-proof skills. That's not what the robots are going to take over, so to speak. But what's interesting is I also think you're seeing a shift, so I'll push back on your premise for a second, which is that I don't think of creativity as a soft skill. I think traditionally we have thought of it as a soft skill, but when you look at a lot of the research and the academic research on creativity, we actually know that there's a lot of like recurring things you have to do in order to develop a good sort of ability to be creative. And so I think increasingly what you'll see, at least I hope, is that creativity will be viewed as a hard skill, prioritized as such, and we'll sort of reframe how we do training and how we do education to like respect the fact that it's something you can learn.
So creativity, how can businesses find or hire the right people for creativity? How can they find it in the interview process or before the interview?
Yeah, I mean, I think creatives attract creatives, and there's this sort of knowingness. Like if you're a creative and you walk into a set of interviews or you walk into a company you're talking to, you can sort of tell when things are wrong. You can tell when things are off. Like you can tell when this isn't really the culture you want. And ultimately, I think the core things for creatives are the ability to try new things, the ability to have time to learn and do research, and the ability to practice their craft. And to me, all of those things sort of underpin this idea that great creative cultures are also great cultures of psychological safety. It's where you feel that if you experiment and you mess up, you're not going to get fired, right? And to me, if you're a manager, if you're a CEO, if you're a team lead, how do you build in that psychological safety into what you're doing, into how you coach, into how you develop people? And if you do that, I think the ability to attract, retain, and nurture creative talent will sort of flow from that.
Okay, all right, so let's dive into the 2020s, the trends that we think are going to define this coming decade.
Right now.
Yeah, it is. We're already several months into it. So, Alan, one topic that you've been discussing is executive marketing as a key opportunity.
Yeah.
Let's describe this. You've got a few examples of companies that have done this well?
Yeah, so executive marketing is basically this idea of taking one of your executives and having them be sort of like the face of the company. And especially in sort of a social media world, it's actually a whole sort of new slew of opportunities unfold. So if you think back to B2C, like think about like Men's Warehouse, right? The CEO of Men's Warehouse was on all the TV ads, right? And it humanized the brand, made it more personable, built this idea of like integrity and authenticity and all these things. You come to social media, and I think one of the problems that happened with social is, social media literally where social's in the name, but a lot of brands, no offense to all my friends in brand world, tweet from their brand accounts with this sort of like voice of God, third party tone, but like it's literally a social media platform. And so what you saw, I think, over the last sort of 2 years, I think will be a big trend for the next 10, is that in B2B, we started to see executives becoming the face of their companies through social media. And that often means like posting on their personal profiles. So like, I have a few examples that are on this slide, but David Gerhardt, who's the CMO of Privy, formerly VP of Marketing at Drift, like a lot of the content he did was content with him as a sort of protagonist, but it humanized Drift and made them more interesting, and people were like captivated. And I think in part because it's implicit that it's also authentic, right? You can literally see the person.
Right.
And it doesn't just have to be educational content. Like some of the examples here, like Quentin does a lot of content that's sort of storytelling and more narrative. And Shay does these sort of like funny, sort of like literally skits on LinkedIn that are wildly popular, but help drive business to the marketing agency she runs.
All right, and I think on a level, we talk about this a lot at LinkedIn, the idea of employee advocacy, which is activating your employees to talk about your company and giving them sort of the freedom, maybe arming them with stuff to talk about. And just from a pure mathematics point of view, it makes sense because employees tend to have 10x more reach than the brand. And also, when an employee shares something, it's 2 times more likely to be passed along, liked, engaged with. So it makes a ton of sense. And I think that at companies like you're talking about here, I would assume that the employees get involved too to support getting this out there.
Drift did this really cool campaign when they were launching their email product, and I think I'm sort of a fanboy for Drift's marketing. I think they do a really good job, where they had every single employee in the company, they didn't force them, but they sort of asked them to post a video, not a post, a video on LinkedIn about why they were excited about the new email product. And that, up until that point, was the highest traffic day ever for their website. All of the videos combined got 400,000 views, and those are like high quality views. Those are not sort of forced paid views. And I think it's a great example of like the total cost for that marketing campaign, 0.
Right. And your mom will share it too.
Yeah, exactly. That's important.
Yeah.
We're really starting to see, I think, this trend of companies focusing on their corporate, their consumer, and their employer brand strategy, and it all becoming more one consistent approach. But I think executive marketing really leaning into the corporate strategy, employee advocacy, really about employer brand, huge as far as this consistent approach.
And it goes back to this idea of the educated consumer, where like people want to like see, feel like your brand, your experience Like they want to know that if they're buying a product from a company, that the company culture is good. It all sort of reinforces itself.
Yeah, care just as much about what you stand for, what you represent, as the
100%.
products and services that you're selling.
Yeah, we've seen it be really effective with the consulting companies. They
Yep.
arm their consultants, and they become, online. They show their category
Yeah,
expertise.
if you're selling expertise, like you have to establish yourself as an expert.
Right. Yeah, and it works for them. So let's move on to trend number 2. So trend number 1 was about this executive marketing concept, and another one that we see only gaining steam as we move forward is this concept of the franchise or blockbuster approach to marketing. So it usually involves a content brand series. The one that I often talk about is Mary Meeker's Internet Trends report. Put that out every year, and it just spreads like wildfire. I mean, people are waiting for this like 400-page deck, and it's about expertise, but it's also about hitting that brand again and again, year after year, rather than just doing a marketing campaign and then forgetting about it. What do you guys see this as a trend continuing in this decade?
So I think of it as sort of in two sides. So I think the sort of franchise approach is incredibly valuable for all the reasons you brought up, which is like, if you're doing a piece of content marketing, people enjoyed it, you're doing it again next year, they know I'm going to really benefit from it. I think the sort of blockbuster approach that spins off of that is this idea of doing sort of shinier, bigger, more like high production quality content. And you're seeing this a lot with B2C brands. Like Lyft has a whole entertainment studios now, which is like kind of wild, but you're also seeing with B2B. So Shopify, for example, now has Shopify Studios, and they're creating like long form, mid-form, and short form content. MailChimp, right, which is marketing SMBs, like they have this whole thing of MailChimp Presents where they're producing podcasts, documentaries, and it's kind of crazy. Some of these B2B brands are doing like fictional scripted shows, but it makes sense because you think about the amount of money B2B marketers have spent on even things like white papers. The idea is like, okay, if our job is to build brand awareness, this is an obvious place we should go. And it builds that franchise idea, right? If MailChimp is producing one of your new favorite podcasts, like you're going to be excited about it. You're going to want to listen to the next episode. You're going to build that brand loyalty with MailChimp.
Well, what's interesting about that idea is I've often said content marketing, especially on our blog, the number one thing we need to do is be useful to marketers or to salespeople. But I've also added like a little thing lately is could also be entertaining for them, because speak to them, understand that you understand their pain points with humor and other things, and it's very effective.
Yeah, and I think the ultimate point here is that when it comes to B2B marketing, we often forget the humanity of all this stuff, and I think this is where we can really learn a lot from consumer marketing, consumer marketers, how they do a really good job at understanding the underlying emotions of their marketing personas and then driving towards those emotions. Kind of to what you were speaking to before.
Any thoughts on the franchise or blockbuster approach?
I think the note on potentially making it really entertaining, I think is a huge opportunity too. So we even start to think about new technology and new ad formats that are coming out. So LinkedIn Live, for example, we're seeing
Meta. Whoa.
Yes, right.
LinkedIn Live with marketers.
This is a franchise that we're participating in right now, Live with Marketers.
Very fair. But I think it's exciting, and we're seeing people start to pick up, and a lot of this gain traction. We've even seen some kind of walking to work campaigns that employees have started doing organically. So I think it all speaks to speaking to the emotion, engaging folks, making it entertaining. This is really what's going to pick up as we move forward.
Yeah, there's also a concept I think a lot of people talk about is, the first part of technology is just about the technology. Really using the technology well makes it human. Like you get to like with videos, you're able to get your face and your emotion and everything in front of people. I think that's the best use of technology when you can do it. And speaking of technology, there's a transition for you. Artificial intelligence seems to be something that is, it's written about everywhere for marketers. AI, it sounds intimidating. Machine learning sounds maybe even more intimidating. And so I'm wondering what you guys think of how sort of the average marketer can take advantage of this or should take advantage of it.
Yeah, I think as I start to think about AI and how marketers leverage it today or can leverage it, I start to think about some of the similar phases that big data has gone through that we've talked about earlier. With respect to AI, marketing leaders really need to start thinking about whether or not they're hiring the right talent, setting up their teams for success to actually build this technology, develop this technology before it can be incorporated into the everyday of marketers. And so this might be hiring more technical analytics teams, marketing analytics teams, or really engineering and data science teams. You might start to think about how this alters the collaboration. So marketers needing to inform the direction of what these teams build. But once you have this in place, then it starts to enable marketers to ask questions to say, with this technology and with these kind of decisions that it can inform, what can I actually do? And so I think it's exciting because it enables us to think about if we're actually able to remove some of these more automated processes, can marketers actually spend their time focused on different types of things? Creativity,
Right.
one thing that you kind of mentioned earlier.
Yeah, and I think this comes down to when you think about digital advertising buying. So you're seeing a lot of these ad platforms, LinkedIn included, using AI, machine learning to automate a lot of the targeting and sort of handle that side of the equation. You can say, optimize my ad campaign for X result. It sort of takes care of the rest. And that was like a huge task for marketers to do manually, and it's just taking that away. And I think the other element when it comes to AI is that we are in very early stages. So like machine learning is sort of a subcategory of AI. It's mostly around classification. Like, okay, is this a fit? Is this that? Is this that? And there's all sorts of other types, right? So there's like deep learning, all these things. And I think as marketers, we're sort of on that first frontier, and it's gonna be really interesting to see where it goes. I think the important thing to note is that my hypothesis would be most of the things that AI will do to impact marketing will be removing manual tasks, not necessarily replacing marketers, but giving them the ability to do more strategic things, which I think is a good thing. So like, don't worry too much about the robots.
And I
For
think,
now.
Yeah. I am concerned about them.
Yeah, me too.
But we see AI in action almost every day when you go to Netflix or Amazon. The recommendation engine is it's a great, amazing feature, and it's AI in action. Do we think that small businesses are going to get there someday, where they're able to do that? Will there be off-the-shelf kind of software?
100%. I think there's a lot of vendors that are making it more and more accessible, and there's sort of like in these sort of like foundational technologies, there's interesting curves of adoption where there's these like low-level programming languages that are built, and then frameworks that abstract some of that, and then eventually when the frameworks become sort of easy to use, people start building low-cost tools that leverage the frameworks, and we're sort of at that point now. We're seeing machine learning sort of be like table stakes in a lot of modern business software, and so it'll only become cheaper, easier to use, more efficient.
I think it's really exciting for small businesses to think about that potential. Really lean marketing teams. A lot of our education customers actually at LinkedIn share the challenges they go through with having maybe 2 to 3 marketers at a university responsible for their entire marketing programs. But being able to remove some of this more manual work, manual processes, it really starts to open up a lot more thinking about what you can do, which I think is hugely exciting.
I think it's kind of funny though, because I've seen a lot of people, a lot of startups try and use AI to handle some of the creative tasks of marketing, and they've all sort of failed. Like I've seen so many startups that are like, we are going to use AI to automate your social media content. And like it's always creates this like very generic content. And so I really think the point you were making before is a really essential point, which is like, I think AI will be very useful for automating very manual tasks that have very clear binary outcomes. Creative is actually harder to really have a binary outcome, and there's sort of infinite possibilities, so it doesn't actually work or lend itself that well. So I think there's going to be a lot of false starts when it comes to AI, and a lot of wasted budget in AI tools.
Right.
Certainly still a role for marketers.
Yes, yeah.
Yeah, I as a former reporter, I worry though because I see AI starting to write sports stories and financial
Finance
stories.
yeah.
Yeah. So, yeah, maybe I've made it far enough that it's not going to affect me, but yeah, it seems frightening.
Good career shift.
So, anything else to say about AI or machine learning, or do we cover the trend?
I mean, there's a lot to say, but I think we cover the trend in terms of small business marketers.
Okay, beautiful. So another trend that we're seeing gain traction in B2B. It's always been, or not always, but recently taken over B2C is influencer marketing. If you get Kim Kardashian to take a picture of your product, you're home free. But how is it being used in B2B, and what does it provide for them?
So I think this is wild that B2B is still behind the ball when it comes to this. I mean, B2C brands for the last 3 to 4 years have really like learned how to do this in a professional way. There's hundreds of influencer marketing agencies, but when it comes to B2B like influencer agencies, there's one that's dedicated to it. And like, I think that's going to be a whole new thing, because if you're a B2B brand, you're trying to reach people, like there are a lot of business influencers out there, and like having them sort of promote and distribute is like sort of obvious. I've seen Adobe do some cool stuff here. I've seen Microsoft do some cool stuff, but like really there's like very few brands doing it, let alone doing it well.
I think it's you mentioned earlier at the start of this session, B2B constantly learning from B2C. I think a great example of that opportunity.
And it's sort of funny because I think part of the delay is that in B2B marketing, I've noticed there's a little bit sometimes of an insecurity around looking foolish, right? Because it's like, you know, you're sort of in these more structured, sort of enterprisey environments, let's say. But like, if it works, who cares? Like, I think we have to like look at B2C, adopt these things faster, take some of those tactics, try them, and like, let it work and let it like do the thing. If it doesn't work, that's fine. But a lot of these tactics will work really well.
Yeah, I mean, you can always try and iterate too. You're going to learn a ton from this, and it's fairly simple, I've found, to get started. I mean, every company, let's hope, has fans.
Yeah.
You can identify them and approach them and ask them about how they might be willing to work with you to promote your company.
100%.
Yeah. Anybody doing a particularly good job? You mentioned Adobe. Anybody else come to mind?
Yeah, Adobe does some really cool programming where they pick a bunch of B2B influencers and they do programming with them all year. So they like have them come to their conference, they do digital content with them, and they sort of like make those people almost more ambassador style, which I think is interesting. I think on the influencer side, I think Jay Baer, who's a business author, does a good job of this. Like he'll do a lot of like sponsored webinars for B2B brands. And so Jay has an audience, the brand has an audience, Jay knows how to perform well and like do really well on a webinar. So you also get the talent for your webinar. So it all mixes up into this nice little concoction. So I think those are two examples I like to point to.
Do you think companies are already sort of doing it and not calling it influencer marketing, or maybe they're doing it and they just need to take another extra step to get there and
I think
activate?
a broken clock strikes the right time twice a day. Is it twice a day? Once a day? I don't even know. But I think we do things sometimes without intentionality, and I think we have done tactics that are influencer marketing, but I think very few brands are being intentional about an influencer strategy.
Okay. And it seems like the cost could be minimal, especially if you're just getting started where nobody's doing it in an industry. If you're the leader.
Compared to doing expensive paid campaigns or sponsoring a conference, I think influencer marketing, the same reason it took off in B2C, is that it can be very cost efficient.
Right. Okay. What are the best platforms for it in B2B? Do you think, for influencer marketing? You can use any kind of social. You talked about events, webinars.
I mean, not to like be cliche, but like LinkedIn, I think is really good for it. And you started to see a few campaigns on LinkedIn, sort of the B2B influencer side, and like, I just think that LinkedIn has the reach, it has the audience, it has the ability, even if you think about the analytics it provides, even right now, like company, region, title level. So even though it's not a native sort of product thing yet, in the way that Facebook or Instagram, you can, as a brand, sort of have an official handshake with a piece of social content, I think LinkedIn's really good. But otherwise, I think blogs are still good, emails, webinars.
Okay. Another trend I wanted to talk about was ROI. It's been sort of the great white whale for marketers for a long time, figuring out, especially in B2B, whether the campaigns that they're investing in are paying off. And now with digital and attribution becoming more and more available, it seems like ROI is like, maybe we're there where we can actually measure it, campaign by campaign. But one thing we saw when we did some research was that many marketers are sort of trying to measure ROI too early, maybe feeling pressure to show that their campaigns are working, and they're using maybe what you would call KPIs to figure out whether it's working, rather than letting the campaign play out for the whole sales cycle, and where you would really see whether it led to sales or not. you guys have any thoughts on how ROI is going to change in the 2020s? Become more available, or maybe just stay out of reach?
Yeah, I think what we're seeing this shift in how marketers are understanding how they should measure, starting to look towards longer term metrics, more revenue-based, revenue-driven metrics. But it's hard to put into practice day to day, right? And so I think as we think about kind of trends and looking forward, technology is going to play a big role in enabling marketers to measure ROI effectively. So more consistency in flowing in different types of data sources into a unified attribution system, or a MarTech stack that's representative of all the different channels you're using. Today, this is still quite a challenge for marketers, and so even if we know what we should be doing, it's tough day to day. So I think as we look ahead, advancements in technology, more learnings about how to connect across systems, this will definitely help take us steps in the right direction.
All right.
I think what's really hard in marketing is that we look at these things as ors, right? Like I can either be ROI focused or audience focused. And like to me, the actual answer is the difficult answer, which is you have to be both and you have to be really good at both. Because if you try and run a lot of demand gen programs and you have a bad brand with low awareness, low recognition, low like brand affinity, then your demand gen campaigns will be dramatically more expensive than a brand that's beloved, well-known, all these things. So to me, a lot of this stuff becomes a false choice. And the question is, how do we measure all of these things in a way which doesn't drive us crazy? And so the framework I always like to talk about is like really going back to the basics, which is have an analytics strategy for awareness, for engagement, and conversion. And it doesn't have to be a lot, but if you measure all three of those things and they are all going up, you are in a good place. If you only say, hey, if you're like have a new marketing exec job and you come in and say, we're going to be ROI focused, like why are we wasting all this money on brand? For 6 months, that'll work great, maybe even 12. But in 18 months, you'll see the costs for your demand gen campaigns go up and up and up because people are like, wait, who the heck is that?
Yes.
Instant growth and that long-term potential over time.
And this is where I think you see consumer brands do a much better job again to hit this theme of like they understand that the brand building stuff isn't a waste of money, right? It's not a vanity project. It's what allows them to have that air cover to run those more call to action oriented campaigns.
Correct. And then, most B2B companies dramatically underspend on branding.
And the thing is crazy. It's like, to me, it's not even like, it's more of an intentionality thing than a cost. Like one thing we did in my company very early on was like, at the time, like every company in our space had this website that was like blue and white and had a very like sort of like Proxima Nova or Helvetica logo. And I was like, we need to be more fun than this. So we had a logo that is also my dog, which is like this very silly, very cute corgi. His name is Maven. And we sort of made that like a big focal point of the brand, right? And like the logo wasn't expensive to get designed. Like we put it on t-shirts, we put it on boots, and like, but it was like fun, it was human, it was authentic, it was us, it was weird, it was quirky. And that drove so much value for the brand.
It wasn't human, it was a dog.
Yeah, that's fair. But like, okay, we're gonna get into my, it's my child. And so I think that's interesting where if you looked into our like, Salesforce records and all the emails we've sent back and forth to customers, I think what you'd find is that dog came up a lot in conversations.
Right.
It built a lot of positive brand affinity. And people would say, oh, you're that company with the dog thing. Let's talk.
Right.
Right?
Yeah.
And that's intentionality. It's not just cost.
I used to do a series of videos on LinkedIn, and I featured the sophisticated marketer dog, which was my dog Socks. And those videos did far better than anything.
Everyone likes
else.
puppies and babies.
Right, exactly. Babies. Yeah, maybe grandchildren one day I'll be. So we're starting to get some questions from the audience. I encourage you to, if you have some questions for Alan or Lacey, to submit them, and we'll ask them. In fact, I'm going to ask one right now. And Alan, I'll start with you on this one because you've done a lot in this area. In fact, you just mentioned about video. What do you think in the 2020s video is what role it's going to play?
I think you're going to see it go in sort of two very distinct branches. You're going to have the sort of organic, sort of behind the scenes, shot on iPhone type video content become, I think, more prolific in B2B. There's a lot of the video content that I do and it resonates really well because I think people know that it's authentic because it's literally like, it's me on my iPhone, right? And I think you're going to similarly see this sort of other branch, which is very high production value. This is stuff that we're talking about MailChimp doing. I think the stuff in the middle, you'll start to sort of see sort out, where it's like, hey, if you're going to like spend a bunch of money to produce content, but it's just going to end up being okay, like just shoot it on your iPhone. But if you want to do something that's like really creative and really special and really invest, that's where I think you're going to see a lot of budget going to. So you'll see a divergence in those two paths.
Okay. And Lacey, what does Insights know about how video performs on LinkedIn, or do we have advice on what to do?
Yeah, I think we're still learning a lot, but it's definitely picking up a lot of traction. And so definitely as a branding play, I think a lot of opportunity. Still, I think marketers are looking to understand how it factors into their full kind of product suite or product mix that they leverage. So more learnings around how it complements, kind of when to use what type of ad format when or where. Is something that marketers are looking to get into a little bit more. But video is definitely picking up.
One sort of tip for on LinkedIn, if you're in sales, that I think is like a very effective way to use video lower down in the sort of customer funnel is, usually a salesperson is connected on LinkedIn, or at least they should be, with all of their prospects, right? So when you bring on a new customer to your company, and let's say you go visit their office, like you should be shooting a video with that customer, like saying, hey, like I'm here with like John or Sally, and we just onboarded, we're really excited. Like Sally, tell us about like what you're working on, whatever. Posting that on LinkedIn builds you a relationship with your customer, your existing new customer, but it also shows all of your prospects that are connected with you on LinkedIn that A, this is a real person, that B, they clearly respect and have real relationships with their customers, and C, people buy their stuff, right?
Right.
And so I think video can actually be used in the sort of conversion stage of the funnel if you're very intentional about what type of content you're putting on.
Yeah, we talked earlier about the empowered customer, the empowered buyer. And we talked a lot about how they're looking to their peers as well as like online communities, review sites. I think it just goes back to that. And video can be one format, one additional avenue to showcase that authenticity.
Totally.
Yeah.
So here's an interesting question. What is the best advice you can give young marketers in this new decade?
I think one that comes top of mind for me is really thinking about skills that make you, pun intended, marketable.
Great
but definitely there's a host of the technical skills, the hard skills, thinking about what's table stakes, but it's so much more. It's all about strategy, being able to inform a point of view, that creativity. This is what's going to help differentiate you in interview processes, on your LinkedIn profile, your resume. So thinking a little bit broader about the skills that you surface and how you surface them.
Right. What about, you got a lesson from the book?
Well, I have a sort of broader one from, which is 4 words, which is learn how to write. I mean, I think everything in marketing comes from writing. Like even when we're doing video content, right? Like we wrote out the intro for this video, right?
Yeah.
Like everything is writing. So I just think that if you want to be a marketer and you have not gotten serious about your writing, you are missing the joke.
Yeah, I totally agree, and that's exactly what I was going to say. I mean, my background is as a reporter, and I came in totally prepared when I became a marketer because of writing on a deadline, writing every day.
Make an argument.
Yeah, and I think you can be, and I think this is one lesson from your book, is that you should be intentional when you watch TV or watch movies, or when you read like stories in the magazines that you like, about how they're telling the story, how they structure them, because there's really only a few structures that work, and if you can master those and understand how they work, you can be an effective marketer too.
One of the stories I talk about in my book is Kurt Vonnegut. When he was working on his master's thesis, he decided that he wanted to learn how to become a great writer. So what he did is he went and took all these great novels, and he literally mapped out the story arcs of their plot, and he found there's these 4 recurring story arcs in successful novels, which, by the way, there's a book that came out a few years ago that sort of did the same thing but using a machine learning algorithm and found a very similar sort of finding. But there's these 4 recurring story arcs, because what he realized is that his job was not to reinvent storytelling, it was to tell his own stories using the structures and the formats that we know work.
Right.
And I think the same thing applies to marketers. Like, you're not here to completely reinvent marketing, right? You're here to learn what works and add your own novel twist to it.
think storytelling too, just to be
Yeah.
explicit, really shows up in a couple different ways, but certainly the obvious being in the marketing campaigns you create for your audiences, but maybe not thought of quite as much, or not at the forefront of our minds, is storytelling in terms of performance marketing. So just surfacing up the KPIs that we mentioned earlier, even if you're measuring everything you need to be, that's not enough. But to really prove out your value as a marketing team internally to your colleagues, you need to think about data-driven storytelling, getting to the so what, communicating how you're actually impacting financial outcomes and kind of business outcomes. So I think storytelling, writing
So
in a
important.
sense, it comes up for marketers in a lot of different ways.
Yeah. And I feel data, if someone comes into our company and can understand how to collect data and how to do that, how to tell the story with it, they're invaluable. Yeah. From both internally selling, a project and externally. So let's see what else we've got here from the, and remember, you can submit some questions. We'll ask them.
Really
to
hard
Alan.
ones, like really hard ones, please.
Let's see. Someone's talking here about KPIs. Like, which are the key KPIs you should be following? And I think the overarching thing is that it varies from company to company. But are there any you think that like everybody should at least take a look at? Do you have a favorite KPI? A KPI you think about before you go to sleep at night?
So to reinforce what I was saying before, I think about those 3 steps: awareness, engagement, and conversion. And I think a simple data strategy is better than a complicated one or no data strategy. And so to me, it's like if you had one KPI for awareness, one KPI for engagement, one KPI for conversion, that would be great. I mean, I'll give you an example. You could have total impressions across all channels for awareness. So social impressions plus web traffic, great. Engagement, you could have total social engagements plus, people who click more than X pages of the website, done. And conversions, you could have revenue booked, right? Like,
Yep.
it doesn't have to be difficult, it just has to be there.
Right.
In addition to thinking about objective, which I think is incredibly important, I also start to bucket it up by kind of short-term and long-term KPIs.
Yeah.
I think
Love
that's
that.
going to be a helpful way to view it.
Yeah.
So actually, I do feel there's a time and place for vanity metrics.
For sure.
And those can be more for creative, short-term optimizations, making sure that your content is engaging, it's resonating. But longer-term KPIs may be more focused on opportunities closed, deals closed, ROI, actual revenue-driven. So short-term and long-term can be an
Yeah.
approach too.
Yeah, and I focus on the blogs, like I said, I edit 2 blogs here at LinkedIn, and I focus on awareness metrics for sure, like are we driving the traffic we need on an overall basis? And then I analyze that traffic, which are the blog posts that are driving the most of that traffic, and try to replicate those posts or learn from those posts. And then way down the funnel, we're able to track to some degree how many people are coming to our blog and then buying advertising on
The
LinkedIn.
newsletter.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, we can tell subscribers is also a huge
great one for
metric for
blogs,
us.
yeah.
And as long as that arrow keeps going up, we're very happy. Here's a question: how often should content be posted? Are only those following you seeing your posts on LinkedIn?
So I'll answer the question broadly, and then I'll answer a question specific to LinkedIn. So broadly, I always think about you want to align your content posting schedule to the content consumption schedule of that platform. So on Twitter, people are checking it 5, 6, 10 times a day.
Right.
You should be posting 5, 6, 10 times a day. I've tend to found on LinkedIn, it's a little bit less, right? So I only post once a day on LinkedIn. With your blog, right, it might be twice a week. With your podcast, it might be once a week. So what is your underlying customers? What is their consumption schedule? Match that, because I think if you don't, you start to get forgotten. And then with LinkedIn, your followers will see your content, but also because of the social and viral actions on posts, if someone likes it or shares it, their own connections will see that they did that. So you get a second and third degree network effect, which is part of why I think LinkedIn is a really powerful social platform.
We've also seen too when employees are sharing it out. So if employees are the ones kind of creating that viral activity, that's when we see a lot of engagement for brands and companies as well. I think it's actually like 10 times more engagement on employer shared posts than kind of direct company shared posts.
I'm a believer that frequency is a undervalued kind of aspect of content marketing. I think you probably should be more frequent than you are. We try to publish on our blogs daily, 5 days a week, and it's very effective. Not everybody has a budget to do that, but what I would say is pick an ideal frequency and commit to it. You can't sort of just publish a blog every, say, month or
Yes.
2 months. You have to have a certain frequency to build the subscriber base to make the thing actually work.
Well, there's so much going on the internet, people just forget you,
Right,
right?
for
And
sure.
So if you're not top of mind, and this is being top of mind, we're talking about this for years. Like, this is a long-term investment. You can't just stop doing it. And I think that's why you see, especially with content marketing, where it can have this long sort of build time, a lot of people give up because it's a lot of work. But the other side of that is you'll eventually have, hundreds of pieces of content on your blog that are getting organic traffic, lots
Correct.
of links, and that's a real asset.
Yeah, what they call it the flywheel, right? The
Yeah.
more it starts spinning, the faster it spins, and the more powerful it is. We found that totally. And you just think about all of the metrics about you need to be in touch with a customer or a prospect 7 times, 21 times, 28 times before they begin to recognize you and ultimately buy your product. So a frequency is huge, and I think people aren't thinking about it enough.
I think so certainly very important, and really staying relevant, getting in front of folks. But important to remember that the same ideal frequency may not fit everyone or work for everyone, so it isn't always a one-size-fits-all approach.
Totally true.
I think keeping in mind that the strength of your brand awareness, all of this can play a role in terms of how engaging your ads are, how much traffic
Personas,
virality
yeah.
they start to drive. So frequency, hugely important, but isn't a one-size-fits-all
Yeah,
benchmark
absolutely.
as far as where that bar is.
So another question. So this is from a startup with not a lot of marketing dollars. What are the best ways of using LinkedIn to enhance both brand and demand gen?
Yeah.
You gotta.
So I think thinking about your organic presence and pages, your company page and your page presence on the platform is a huge opportunity. And so we already talked about the power of employees, but actually, can you think about what your brand represents, what it stands for? Is that showing up on your actual LinkedIn company page? And are your employees actually an asset for you, helping to push out content, driving more of that virality and traction? That can start to build up more of that branded presence that then you can then focus a little bit more of your efforts kind of honed in on more demand gen marketing.
Yeah.
I think the biggest cheat code in social media advertising to me has been for the last 5 years, still is, still super effective, still underutilized, is use the social features of social ads. So what I mean by that is that, if you're running ads in a news feed, right? So if you're running ads in the LinkedIn news feed and you're just using it as another display format, like, why not just be running display ads, right? Like, you should be asking people questions in your ads. On Twitter, I'm starting to see a lot of people do this really well, where they're doing promoted tweets that spark conversation, and they're getting that organic lift above and beyond the paid lift, so it lowers their overall cost per impression, which is the whole point of social advertising, is getting that social dynamic. So to me, it's like, if you're a scrappy company, and you're using in-feed advertisement as display, it's like, I'm gonna have a heart attack.
Well, I think I can't emphasize this enough, that the company page on LinkedIn is totally organic, it's free, and you can build followers from current customers, from your employees, and then build from there as more people share the content. It is the key to making LinkedIn work for a company.
Yeah, I think data is such a powerful asset too for small companies that are really thinking through how do they hone and refine their content marketing strategy really effectively as well. And so thinking about what audiences are most engaging with, what's really resonating with your peers, can you leverage research to actually figure out where your unique white space is for your company to be talking about thought leadership and branding on LinkedIn. As you can kind of get a hold of these types of insights and refine and kind of really have a targeted approach, that's where it can be really powerful for smaller companies as well.
Alan, you did something on LinkedIn with video that was very effective for you, right? Tell us a little bit about that story.
Yeah, so I think it was 2.5 years ago, it might have been 3. LinkedIn launched video in beta, and I got kind of weirdly obsessed about getting into the beta. And at some point, this is like a true story, I had this really weird dream that I was in a bar and I saw Jeff Weiner, and I was like, Jeff, you need to give me LinkedIn video access. And he was like, sure. And I woke up and I was like, that is like the nerdiest dream of all time. So I posted about it on LinkedIn and I tagged Jeff because I thought like, this is kind of funny. And anyway, within like 3 hours, he responded and was like, you have beta access. And it turned into this like super viral post. It got like 1 million views. And so I got beta access to LinkedIn Video kind of early. And I was sort of thinking about the format and I was like, okay, like LinkedIn's all about like education. It's all about people. And my sort of job, I was running a software company at the time, I was like pretty extroverted. Like I meet a lot of interesting people in my job. Like, why don't I just like ask them when we're getting lunch if we can shoot like a little interview? So I started filming these like 60, max 90-second video interviews called Alan Asks. That was the hashtag I used. And basically asking them one simple question, they provide a tip, and then asking people to participate in the questions. And the last time I asked the video team, the videos have total gone about 6 million views over the last 2.5 something years, driven tons of leads to my company, recruiting, book sales, all sorts of stuff, and it's cost a total of $0.
Yeah, $0 is big. Well,
Zero is the
you need a phone, but that's
Yeah,
about
phone.
it,
Yeah,
right?
that's true.
So that dream,
It was a
What did-
weird dream. Like,
what did your analysts say?
oh, my therapist had a field day. He was like, you need to spend less time on LinkedIn. Not really. Don't stop using LinkedIn.
All right, so we are about out of time. So I'm going to thank you guys, Alan and Lacey, for talking with me and our audience today. Fantastic stuff.
Thanks for having us.
Yeah, I thought it was awesome. I really appreciate it. So we hope you guys gain some valuable insights and learnings from the show. And before we close, please make sure to fill out the survey on Slido. Again, we take that very seriously. We look at it carefully and try and figure out what we can do better the next time. Like probably have a new moderator. And then thanks again for joining, and we'll see you next time.
Awesome.
Yeah.